So hello everyone. So in this lecture video, I am talking about the second half of the competency summarize the effects of sustainability on health and well-being. Specifically on this lecture videos, this is going to be two of them. We're going to be talking about the learning objectives, air, water, food, and soil, quality affecting biodiversity. And the last one is the evaluate the reasons for sustainability concerns with human population growth. Okay? So in this lecture video, we're going to be talking about, so related to air, water, food, and soil quality is pollution, right? So if obviously we know already from the previous lecture videos that in order for living organisms to live, they actually need water. They need oxygen, obviously, and for plants, that specifically, they definitely need very, very healthy soil. All right, and aquatic animals, they need, in this case, very clean oceans and very clean bodies of water to live in. So pollution, then, we're going to talk about the quality of soil, air, water quality, and air quality based on pollution. So obviously, the more some pollution are man-made, and obviously some pollution are natural. Okay, an example of a natural pollution is volcanoes erupting. When volcanoes erupt, they emit a lot of ash, a lot of, in this case, a lot of materials that actually cover the atmosphere, and then it affects the ultraviolet radiation from the sun. It affects air quality, and obviously all of those waste products that actually comes from a volcano eventually comes down, and if it comes down in soil, it obviously, in this case, pollute the soil, and if it goes down in bodies of water, it obviously then pollutes water. But primarily speaking, we are talking about human pollution. So in terms of human pollution, we have two types of sources of pollution. We have what we call point source. So this is actually from a clearly identifiable source. So again, from a previous lecture video, we talk about Superfund, right, as one of the legislative acts that actually is related to the environmental movement. So Tecumseh was identified as the big culprit when it comes to polluting the Sheboygan River. So that's called point source pollution. So if you can say with certainty that majority of these pollutants come from this specific source, that's called point source pollution. Okay. The other one, which is much more common, is called non-point pollution. So it comes from many different sources. So an example would be, in this case, nitrogenous waste, waste that actually comes from fertilizers. So if you have a bunch of farms, right, and then you obviously also have a bunch of factories up the river, all of them make what we call non-point. So in this case, non-point means to say that we do not know for sure who makes up the majority of this actually of the release of the pollutants to the environment. Okay, and there's four main categories: industrial, residential, commercial, environmental. All right, so industrial obviously means what the way it is, right? So industrial, like, so that means power plants, right? So like in this case, industries that like actually make up parts. Residential, obviously homes. Commercial, that means to say we're talking about, like in this case, malls. Okay, so when we're talking about retail space, that's what we talk about, commercial. And environmental, and we already talked about environmental, we already talked about the volcano, that's an environmental pollution. Okay, so there are, in terms of sources of pollution, when we talk about point source and 9-point pollution, we're talking about where the pollutants actually come from. In terms of these types of pollution, organic, inorganic, toxic, thermal, and radiation pollution, we're talking about the type. So this is actually a typo, okay? Haha, typo. So this is actually a mistake. It actually should actually say types of pollution, okay? Inorganic pollution. Inorganic pollution is primarily comes from, in this case, we're actually talking about minerals. So we're talking about metals. Okay, that's actually inorganic pollution. Okay, so cadmium, mercury, that's inorganic pollution. In small levels, organic pollution means anything that comes from carbon. So fossil fuels is actually a type of organic pollution. Plastics is a type of organic pollution. And the reason why that is because plastics and fossil fuels comes from the decomposition of living organisms. Okay, so, and then toxic pollution. Toxic pollution means to say that you get a little dose of it, you're dead. That's basically what toxic pollution means. So even though I said inorganic pollution are heavy metals, now obviously if it's in small amounts, we call it inorganic pollution if it's in such large amounts that it can actually kill a human being. That's toxic pollution. All right. Thermal pollution is when things either become too hot or too cold. Okay, and most of the time we're talking about heating of bodies of water. So when you actually have a power plant right next to, let's say, Lake Michigan, the temperature of that area of Lake Michigan would be higher than normal. Okay, so that's thermal pollution. And radiation pollution, which is radioactive materials. Now, just to give you an aside, radiation pollution can also be toxic. All right, so there's actually a lot. So organic pollution could also be toxic. Inorganic pollution could also be toxic. So it all depends. Toxic pollution and all of these other types of pollution depends on the levels of contaminants or pollutants that are actually in the environment. Okay, so in terms of environmental pollution, we have a bunch of them. So for our purposes, the primary purposes for us today is actually air, water, and soil pollution. And the reason why this is, again, is this is actually what affects, now all of this affects us, all of these types of pollution affects us. But however, this top three here are, to some varying degrees, can be consequential for life, our lives and the lives of other living organisms as well. Okay, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time here about air pollution, okay, or actually in this case water and soil pollution. So I don't know if you know this, but humans, us, okay, are 70% water. So we know already for a fact that it only takes us a few days to live without water, whereas it takes us a few weeks to live without food. Okay, so based on that, just understand that water is actually a very, very important component of living organisms, specifically for us humans. So think about it, right? So we get most of our drinking waters because we're in the lakeshore counties here, Manitowoc and Sheboygan. We probably get a lot of our waters from Lake Michigan, right? Now, the good thing about Lake Michigan is it's a huge body of water. However, just if we dump something very, very harmful to Lake Michigan in high amounts, in becomes toxic pollution, right? How are we going to get a clean source of water for us? So that's one. The other thing about water pollution as well is water pollution also kills, in this case, aquatic life. It kills fish, right? It kills game fish. Okay, it kills fish that we actually eat, salmon, okay, perch, if you want to think about it, trout, okay? So those are very, very important things as well to consider. So in water pollution, we might not be dead immediately, but the effects are definitely consequential, especially if you, in this case, if you actually are dependable on this source of water. Okay, we're lucky we have Lake Michigan. Now, if people have like in this case an aquifer basically is a freshwater source that's trapped between rocks. What happens if a community depends on an aquifer and that aquifer actually gets contaminated? Well, there goes the water supply. Okay, so now soil pollution is important in one regard, and soil pollution is important because of plants. And as we know already in previous lectures, soil is a necessity specifically for plants, which are the producers in this case, right? We are consumers, plants are producers. If we don't have enough producers, the consumers eventually die off. So that's, again, a very, very important factor in this in terms of soil pollution. So soil pollution we're talking about. Now, soil pollution is also very important because we also raise crops in soil. So if our soils are polluted, we cannot, in this case, raise crops which are necessary for us to feed a multitude of people. Okay, especially in terms of our population in today's world. So that's very, very important. Now, air pollution. Okay, I don't have to tell you anything about air pollution because if you've ever had to, in this case, take a sniff in, like if you ever had behind like a person who had in this case a malfunctioning exhaust system, you know what I'm talking about, air pollution, right? Air pollution is very important because it's actually important for our health directly because we basically breathe in air all the time. The problem also with air pollution, ladies and gentlemen, is air pollution is not necessarily contained in one area. Okay, like soil pollution is contained normally where the soil is and within specific boundaries, but once you pollute the air then gets carried around vast areas, and obviously that makes air pollution a little bit more of a problem when it comes to the life of most living organisms. Okay, noise, radioactive pollution, thermal pollution. A very, very big impact of thermal pollution, ladies and gentlemen, is actually bleaching, coral bleaching. So I don't know if you've ever heard about this. The reason why a lot of coral reefs, which 25% of aquatic animals actually need in order for like actually where they live, 25% of aquatic animals actually live in reefs. Well, what happens is when the temperature is too hot, especially because of global warming, what happens is actually the corals then bleach. They actually become pale and they no longer have any color, and that's actually death. That actually means to say that the coral reefs are basically dead at this point. Okay? So here we go. Acid rain. So acid rain primarily comes from coal. Right? So I'm not trying to bash coal, but coal is actually, again, we know for a fact that the reason why coal and fossil fuels are harmful is because the coal and fossil fuels come from the ground, and the ground contains a lot of harmful substances. Okay, so here, if you have nitrous oxide, and actually nitrous oxide, multiple species of nitrous oxide, this is actually what catalytic converters try to eliminate. Okay, but catalytic converters are not 100% efficient, so obviously you're going to have nitrous oxide in the atmosphere. That gives you nitric acid. Sulfur dioxide gives you sulfuric acid. And acid rain, okay, now contaminates obviously the soil and mostly bodies of water. Okay, it doesn't really contaminate air because they're so heavy that they actually come down and they actually do not get dispersed like this do. These are actually sources of air pollution, but acid rain is actually sources of soil and water pollution. Now, what are the effects of this? Now, obviously, if the soil becomes acidic, okay, FYI, the primary one of the necessities for plants is actually nitrogen, right? Nitrogen is actually basic. So if you drop acid on top of a basic solution, the nitrogen actually gets, in this case, gets diminished. Okay, and so there's not enough nitrogen for plants to actually accumulate, and obviously they don't actually grow very, very well in this case. For oceans or for bodies of water, small bodies of water, oceans, this is not, doesn't really affect them that much because oceans and lakes are so big. But for small lakes, small rivers, small creeks, this is actually of a big concern, because what happens is when the water, the fresh water, becomes too acidic, obviously no fish, no living creatures can actually live in that kind of environment. Okay, so very, very important here. And now we're talking about climate change in this case. Okay, so this is actually a type of air pollution, but the problem with the greenhouse gases is obviously of the changes in temperature that we actually have, these extremes in weather that we're actually suffering right now. Okay, so I don't know about you, but there's been a lot of rain lately. It's been cold lately, and it's not even October yet. So it just tells you that the temperature, the weather has actually been changing. The climate has been changing. FYI, weather is a day-to-day effect. So the weather today, the weather tomorrow, that's different. When we talk about climate, that's the range of normal temperatures within a specific set of time. So let's say the normal temperatures during this time of the year is between 60 degrees to 84 degrees. That's climate, okay? And that climate gives us the type of trees and the type of animals that actually live in that specific type of climate, okay? But obviously the climate change, okay, has been having this bad effect, and obviously we know for a fact that the greenhouse gases have been increasing the Earth's temperature. And there's actually a lot of consequences about this. And I'm going to talk to you about one specific consequence in the next set of lecture video.